All right. Well, hello, everyone. Looks like we started before our time, so that's perfect. We get a little more time to discuss with this panel. And so my name is Daniel Elliott, and I am Director of Education and Strategic Initiatives at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And I'm going to be your moderator today for the Future of Cybersecurity Community panel. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the remaining panelists, and then we're going to dig right in because we have a lot of content that we'd love to cover over the next about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. And so we, of course, have Brian Harrell, Vice President and Chief Security Officer at AVANGRID. We have Kristin Judge, my good friend, who's the CEO and President of Cybercrime Support Network. Thanks for joining us. We have Joshua Motta, who is the co-founder and CEO of Coalition. And we have Tobias Whitney, the Vice President of Energy Security Solutions at Fortress Information Security. So it is a pleasure being in everyone's company, and it is really an honor being part of the inaugural Curriculaville Security Awareness Summit. And so we're going to dig right in, all right? So my first question is actually for Kristin. You know, it's good to be with you on this panel. And, you know, as we close Cybersecurity Awareness Month 2020, my gosh, we're already rounding it out here. We want to look now to the future because cybersecurity doesn't end right in October. It's not just a one monthly event. So what do you see as some of the themes moving forward for the future of security, particularly as this panel was talking about the future of cybersecurity community? What do you see as some of the themes as we move forward?
I think what we're seeing at CSN is that once someone has been a victim of a cybercrime and understands the importance of what can happen to them, they're really willing to then add security and reinforce security on their phones and their computers. It's really getting people when they most understand it. It's an opportunity to educate. So when people are talking to someone who needs help from them because they've been a victim, make sure you take the time to actually also secure their networks and take the time to educate.
That's great. And, you know, Brian, Josh, Tobias, I'd love your thoughts on, you know, some of the big themes for the future of cybersecurity that you see coming down the pike.
Hi, Daniel. I'll jump in. So Tobias here, some of the things that I think are big, marquee themes is understand your third parties, who you're doing business with from a technology risk perspective. The game field is changing. A lot of our vendors and manufacturers and suppliers are multifaceted. They don't have the same risk scenario that they don't have the same technologies potentially that they're offering. But what is important is that you get granular in your understandings of what they do. Don't just accept a general assessment or SOBOX assessment or ISO 27000 assessment. Find out what it is that they're doing for you. Understand the controls that are important for you and your organization for that transaction that they're performing for you, and make sure you get all the transparent information, documentation that you need in order to feel comfortable about moving forward with that vendor relationship. And I heard Nick talk a little bit earlier about understanding trust. Well, that's a big part of that. But just don't take it blindly. Don't assume that the trust is there. Ensure that those third-party folks that you work with can prove it.
That's a really great point. And I actually had a specific question for that later on, but let's dig into it right now. I want the others to talk a little bit more about that, because what we don't want, right, is somebody else's weakness to become our own. And so how can organizations better, continuing on what you had discussed, Tobias, how can organizations manage this value chain, their supply chain, to improve their security and not let somebody else's vulnerabilities be their downfall? Do you have tips for the audience on that?
Yeah. So let me continue on those lines. So the company I work for, Fortress Information Security, builds and manages a community-based sharing environment for third-party risk. So That's it in terms of the sales, okay? But the point is, in terms of answering your question, if you look at most large organizations and you do an inventory of all the third parties you interact with, if you say you're a Fortune 500 company, you do an inventory of all the third parties you interact with, what you'll be surprised to see are the volume, the number, the sheer number of third parties, and the types of third parties we work with, whether they're janitorial services or some of the most sophisticated cloud environments that you're going to see from a technology perspective. So the key piece there is not only just understanding the variety and the volume, but as I mentioned before, once you understand who they are, get granular, get transactional, understand who you're dealing with, the individuals that are going to be part, because at the end of the day, they're an extension of your company. We're not in a situation anymore where you can say, hey, that was their responsibility. That was their supply side risk. That's not going to trickle down and impact me. If anybody knows anything about hacking and cybersecurity, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the weak links. They're looking for the areas that people will let their guard down. So that's the big piece is to recognize that you have an incredibly dynamic, probably set of suppliers that have their own challenges, but you treat them no differently than you would treat your own employees and your own resources internally within the organization.
Yeah, Daniel, this is Brian. I'm having to piggyback off Tobias's comments here. I think he's 100% right. It's easy to point to some of the nation state adversaries and understanding what that supply chain looks like China and Russia and stuff like that. But, just the normal vendors that we're using every single day, maybe it's a compliance vendor, maybe it's a laptop vendor, it's a transformer, it's a drone vendor, whatever the case is, are they as secure as you are? I think there's an assumption sometimes that you dot the I's, you cross the T's, you have a very good compliance program, you have a very good security program, and that everyone around you must be the exact same. And that's not the case. And I think a lot of times our vendors can be that enemy avenue of approach to get into our system. And so as we hold ourselves accountable, I think we also need to hold our vendors accountable too. And this is not necessarily put them on notice, or maybe it is, I don't know. But I have been to a number of vendors as I do my little field trips out into the field. And I've made a number of kind of no-knock visits, and I just walk in and, you would be astounded as, how lax their security may or may not be. So don't assume that because you have a great program that nobody else can get in, because your vendor could in fact be that weak link.
And we really focus on the contract, start at the very beginning and, have a vendor checklist of the contract of what you are going to ask them, what questions, what do they have to prove to you about where they're storing their information, how they're sending information back and forth, and the encryption that they use. And there's been some vendors that we've chose not to use because they couldn't really answer the questions.
Well, I think tying this back thematically, like for me, the future of cybersecurity is not thinking about it as a technology problem. It's recognizing that it's a risk management problem.
That's right.
And if you think about it as a form of risk, there's only three things you can do as an organization. You can accept the risk, ideally knowingly, but sadly, in the case of cybersecurity, it's more often than not unknowingly. You can mitigate it, in which, of course, technology can play a role, implementing controls, as Kristin mentioned, in the organization, or you can transfer it. And there's different ways in which you can transfer it. One is to the insurance market, and Coalition is one of the largest providers of cyber insurance in the United States. You can also transfer it to your vendors contractually. And so you can in your contracts, you can make sure that they have a cyber insurance policy that responds to third-party claims. So if they suffer a failure that results in a loss for you, you have the ability to recover under their insurance policy. And this is the same way every other risk works, right? This is why all businesses purchase general liability coverage and so on and so forth. And it still strikes me that most people don't think about it in those terms. And then they realize when it's too late that they've accepted everything, which is to say that they've self-insured. Because someone once asked me, how many people have cyber insurance? And I said, all of them. Only 20 to 30% buy it. The others are insuring themselves. And the question is do they have the balance sheet to withstand that if something bad were to happen?
That's great. Thank you. So that was really great. I could spend the entire hour talking about this topic, but we do have some other topics we want to discuss. And so, Brian, I wanted to throw a question your way, which because you had mentioned nation state adversaries in one of your comments. And so what are some of the biggest problems both private and public organizations are facing with attacks from nation-state adversaries and domestically?
Yeah, I recognize that we're not able to get into classified discussions here, so we'll keep it all very, very open source. But nonetheless, we can have a pretty robust conversation. I think the inconvenient truth here is that we live under a digital economy where everything is interconnected. And I think nation-state adversaries, they see the United States as a cyber-rich environment that they will want to exploit and pillage. I think they masquerade as trusted agents or trusted infrastructure looking for holes and for those gaps to steal our proprietary information and use it to further their cause. You know, as an example, China has over 50 agencies, 50 agencies focused on launching cyber malicious attacks. Russia has 70. And so, you know, the goal is not necessarily to destroy United States of America. I mean, much of their wealth is wrapped up into the United States, but they are focused. Their goal is to destabilize, to cause doubts in our own government, and to embarrass us. And a lot of many of the ways in which they do that is to try and steal information, and of course, you know, do a number of DDoS attacks or anything that would kind of chip away at this you know, polished image of the United States on the world stage. You know, but I do want to focus my comments on just a few things that I think we should all be doing. Number one, it's collective defense. You know, the government can't do it by itself. Private industry, we can't do it by ourselves. The American citizen can't do it by his or herself. We have to do this together. And you know, I think before, you know, many years ago, it was, well, that's my competitor. I'm not gonna converse back and forth with them. We're all in this together, one team, one fight kind of thing. And so, you know, we really need to embrace this culture of security, similar to what the safety movement did back in the 80s and 90s. Today, if you're a part of industry, you'll probably recognize that typically, you know, that first staff meeting in the morning, it starts with that 2-minute safety meeting. Look around you, take a look at, you know, where you're sitting. Is there a tripping hazard? AEDs are up on the wall. If we have to evacuate, don't go down the elevator, go down the stairs. We're all going to meet and converge down at the restaurant across the street kind of thing and gain accountability. We can do that exact same thing on the security side. We can do that terrorism awareness message. We can talk about security and the lack or how we should not piggyback, and how, you know, phishing is bad, and, you know, the latest phishing attempts that we're seeing in terms of themes across industry. We can bring everyone into the collective conversation today. It'll take, you know, maybe add another 45 seconds onto the safety message, but we can get everyone's buy-in from the CEO all the way down to the lower levels of the organization. The next theme that I'll point out is convergence is here to stay. What do I mean by that? On the IT side, on the OT side, industrial control systems, and physical security. Today, we rarely see a physical-only attack or a cyber-only attack. Today, the landscape is converged. It's hybrid. We're seeing, you know, physical impacts have cyber concerns. Cyber impacts have physical concerns. And so today, as we build out our organization, as we create situation awareness, as we build training plans surrounding security, it needs to be the entire security portfolio, and not just cyber, not just corporate security, and not just operations. It is together. It's no longer good enough to say, yeah, we meet with cybersecurity every other Tuesday. We're good. Today, the threats are coming at us at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they're all interlinked. They're all connected. Lastly, insider threat. While I started this talk with, you know, talking about nation-state adversaries, I am convinced that the next major attack that happens in the critical infrastructure space actually happens from within. It happens with people that have, you know, access to the crown jewels. They have the keys to the kingdom. They have unescorted access to very critical infrastructure, the server rooms that are serving your IT infrastructure, et cetera. You know, we need to understand what these individuals are doing on our system day in and day out. And so do we have the monitoring tools? Do we understand what that pathway to violence looks like on the physical side? And is human resources, is business, is legal, is security, is the operational components of the business, are they all talking with each other? Because the last thing we want to see is somebody make a violent attempt or some sort of violent encounter, and somebody on the cybersecurity side says, yeah, we've been monitoring him for some time. He's been looking at violent websites for the past 2 weeks. And there's a disconnect there. We need to be connected across the entire threat spectrum. So investing in insider threat tools, understanding what information is leaving our proprietary system and maybe going to somebody's Gmail, going to your competitor, or maybe a nation state adversary overseas. We have the technology in place today. Are we using it? Are we using it? And so I guess I'll stop there. But I think those are some of the major things that I see in the critical infrastructure space.
That's really great. That was really comprehensive. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. And, I want to add on to a piece of that and pose another question maybe to the group as far also, how does, you talked about insider threats and nation state threats, but what about human error? How does human error contribute to our cybersecurity strategy and plan for an organization?
Yeah, I can start that one. So to me, human error now, especially since our homes are a 6th grade school and a daycare and our office, I think the insider threat that's non-malicious is really the human error. So we've now just opened up all millions and millions more endpoints than we ever had before with all this work from home. A lot of the CISOs I talk to say they pretty much just March and April were just a blur because they were just trying to scramble to get everybody to work from home. But now we have a lot of competing interests on those endpoints in a home right now. And that to me is our biggest insider threat that we're going to be looking at until we start working back in a perimeter that is an office.
Well, and to expand on that, I mean, Daniel, I think you hit it on the head, which is one of the issues I see is whenever someone says cyber, they immediately think of cybercrime. Sure. But in reality, it's like we should really be talking about technological risk. Because if you think about it, creating and adopting technology is one of the innate characteristics of our species. Like it's what separates us from everyone else. And we've gone from rubbing sticks together really fast to like hunching over a keyboard, but everything else has changed dramatically. And there's just this belief that you can get all the productivity benefits of technology without addressing any of the risks. And many of those risks don't involve crime at all. Like technology fails, humans make errors, and it can be devastating. And businesses don't quite realize how dependent they are on technology until you take it away from them. And I would argue, as we're all having literally a virtual conference over Zoom, that we are more dependent on technology today than perhaps we ever have been in human history. So that is certainly a more fundamental question. I agree with you.
Great. So, Josh, I want to direct the next question to you. So, threat landscape changes every day, right? As criminals evolve and change their tactics, so must we. So how can organizations stay ahead of this continuously evolving threat landscape?
It's like there certainly are aspects that are dynamic, but I really feel like there's not a lot that's changed. I mean, we insure tens of thousands of businesses. We have claims every day. And I would tell you that probably 3/4 of them were the result of some sort of email failure. Had they just enabled a very simple control like MFA, we would have had, at least half the number of claims, right? And so it's the very basic things that are tripping businesses up. And even when you juxtapose that with, the nation state world, I used to be a nation state adversary, but fortunately an adversary to China and Iran and others. I worked at CIA for a number of years. And nation state actors don't use sophisticated tools if they don't have to. If I can get into your network with a phishing email or offer your employee a $20 Starbucks gift card, I'm certainly not going to blow a 0 day that we've been working on for the past 12 months. So, sadly, it's the basics. It's the same thing that were tripping up companies 10 years ago. Email, phishing, remote access to their network on the global open internet. I mean, these are the same things that are triggering claims today. I don't see very much like that would require a sophisticated actor in terms of the claims we're seeing. What has changed dramatically is the business model of cybercrime. And the asymmetry has only gotten worse, which is to say that it's impossible to defend a network 100% of the time with 100% efficacy, particularly when the bad guy only has to exploit one error or problem. And also just it's a cost issue. They have to invest so little for such a huge gain. And ransomware, I would say, is probably the greatest business model innovation in the entire history of cybercrime. And it's only getting more and more pernicious, more and more severe. But otherwise, it's still exploiting the same things: phishing, remote desktop protocol, remote access into the network that's on the internet. it's all the basics. So if we could just somehow convince companies to do these basic things, then I think we really could turn the tables and increase the costs for the criminals. And I'm sure Brian and I could go on and on, but how the government can do that would be a wonderful thing as well, because certainly speaking as an insurance provider where we're paying out millions of dollars in claims, it feels like American businesses are quite literally a punching bag for both economically motivated actors and foreign nation state actors.
Well, and Daniel, one of the things we really have to be paying attention to, I read a statistic yesterday that there's 127 new IoT devices being added to the internet every minute or every second. It was something crazy like that. And that's the theme for this week, is these connected devices. And as we're looking to the future, we can't really stay with the same messaging without adding in also, what are you exposing yourself to within your own home, your television, your doorbell, you name it. Now we have all these other devices. And if we don't start talking to people about default passwords and two-factor authentication, and talking to companies about making two-factor authentication opt out instead of opt in, that's really something I've been talking to people about. That I think is going to be the future. We're going to have to make sure that two-factor authentication comes standard on these IoT devices, similar to how Nest had to add two-factor after that young girl who was 8 years old had a creepy guy in her bedroom through the Nest camera talking to her. And what did they do a week later? They made two-factor authentication required on a Nest product. Well, why don't we start doing that now on all of these IoT devices?
And you bring up a great point, Kristin, and it makes me think of, I think Brian was talking about IT and OT earlier. And as organizations continue to bring on more of these connected devices onto their networks, not just at home, but in business, right? We have shadow IT, we have connected escalators and elevators in our hospitals and businesses. How do we manage all of these connections? What are some steps businesses can take to get a grasp on all of these connected devices that we have, not just in our homes where our employees are working, but in our facilities? And I'll open that up to everybody.
Yeah, I think, Brian made the point earlier of I don't think there's a separation between the physical and the cyber at this point in time. And most companies need to realize that. And, I hate to be the boring insurance guy, but, we're the only cyber insurance market in the world that offers coverage for property damage, bodily injury, and even pollution liability resulting from a computer security failure, right? So that's a physical cyber attack. And, it's still shocking to me that even of those sophisticated organizations that are purchasing insurance, if they're in the manufacturing sector, the transportation, utilities, most don't have any coverage for that. And I very much do see that as the next frontier. It's moving well beyond, though, the folks, like you said, that have industrial control systems and SCADA systems. It's now going to every business that's somehow using IoT to deliver a service. And so it's tricky. The number of computers is growing exponentially. Which means also the attack surface for an organization is growing.
Tobias, do you have anything? I know you do.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of things. I think right now, and just to echo what you guys have mentioned, I think we're too reliant on every technology. I think there's an opportunity for companies and individuals to take a step back. One example is, during all this pandemic with COVID, some have made the assumption that, wow, are people operating potentially critical infrastructure from their homes now since they can't go to work? Well, that wasn't necessarily the technological choice that folks made. Sometimes they sent operators that are operating critical grid components, whatever the critical infrastructure is. They set up cots, they set up Winnebagos, they set up mobile homes, and they let the folks that are doing critical things operate systems in a way that didn't utilize other technologies that weren't trusted. So so I think the big advice here is to recognize what's ultimately critical for you as an organization. What is necessary for your folks and your individuals to do the things that they do to support operations or whatever your business is, and make hard calls about what is allowable now and what is not, what information should be shared now and what is not. I think there's a lot of effort that really needs to be addressed in terms of identifying our sensitive and classifying data within your organization. If there's information passing all about various departments, that someone needs to ask the question, is this really necessary for our group our individuals, our team, our department to get our jobs done? And what can we do to scale back, be more effective, but not necessarily being so dependent on the various technologies that we're using?
That's great. That identify piece, right, is so important, because you can't protect what you don't know you have, whether it's physical assets or digital assets. And that's such a great place to start. Was someone else going to add?
Yeah, Daniel's Brian. I was just going to add, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so not until you really do that data classification and really understand through an asset database what you have, then only then can you actually secure it and make the right investments. But I have often said, you know, let's make sure we're protecting pencils like pencils and diamonds like diamonds. Not everything in our organization is critical. However, there are a few things that are the crown jewels, and we start there and then we kind of branch out afterwards. But you know, what are those critical assets? What supports those critical assets? And how do we start there with our investments in data classification? You know, it seems very rudimentary. It seems very 10 years ago that we're having this conversation, but I think there's a lot of organizations out there today that still haven't done this. And I don't fault them necessarily. They need to do it. I completely understand, but now being kind of the CSO of this organization, all you're trying to do is run from fire to fire every single day. And then, oh, by the way, we got compliance. And oh, by the way, somebody's trying to burn down your transmission poles in your organization. Now you got to go after and figure out that piece, right? So there's always a new monster of the moment. You have to make this a priority.
That's great. Thank you. I love that. Safe pencil, or protect pencils as pencils and diamonds as diamonds. That's it. Let's steal that. That's great. So we are going to move into the next line of questioning. That was really great conversation. I love that. So 2020 has been a year with the pandemic, with massive fires and floods and everything else, right? Everything but zombie apocalypse. One question I want to ask is, you know, how should we approach building resiliency planning into our overall business strategy so that we're prepared for whatever moment of uncertainty comes next, right? So these are, you all talked about some really great steps for evaluating vendors and identifying crown jewels, but how should we build resiliency planning into our overall business strategy as a whole?
I think this is the time to have the conversation, just like with victims, it's a time to talk to them about improving their security. Now that we have some things that we've actually seen, businesses are having trouble and have to have all these contingency plans for fires and for hurricanes. I think people's senses are heightened. And so when there's a breach, when there's a problem, it's a great time to teach. And this is a time to encourage people to use the CISA tools, use the tools that come from their vendors. And I think it's up to us on the panel to start having these conversations with people in our lives to say, look, this is what's happening now. It's not this thing that's far out in the future. They can see businesses suffering from COVID scams or whatever it may be. So I think it's incumbent on people like us that understand this issue to start really, you know, get up on the rooftops and have those free resources that are available from CISA, from NCSA, from SBA and others, and get those out there. We need to let people know, while they're feeling a little bit vulnerable, that there is something that they can do, and they can put a plan in place, just like they do for flooding, like they do for fires, and make it like a public health plan or a fire plan or an emergency plan, and talk to people in language, say, look, you're already good at creating an emergency plan. There's another type of an emergency. You know, you may have a ransomware attack in your business. What is your plan for that? And it's just like you plan for a fire or a flood. And I think talking to people in regular language about what they're already good at planning for and what they already right now see, oh my goodness, in 2020, a lot of businesses had to have a resiliency plan. Now let's add the cyber resiliency plan to that conversation so that people won't be so intimidated while they're thinking about emergencies and things like that.
Yeah, I think 2020 has been an absolute dumpster fire. I think there's no such thing anymore as a black swan event. We're living through, you know, a pandemic, 500-year floods. Who knows what comes next? But you know, I think ultimately investing in resilience, have the understanding that bad things are going to happen. Hope is not a strategy. You need to have a response and recovery plan for just about everything out there. But ultimately, it's removing single points of failure and adding redundancy to your system. Assume bad things are going to happen, and when they do you have the relationships built under blue sky conditions? When seconds count, when blood is maybe spilled on the ground, Can we come back to homeostasis as quick as we can? We need to exercise this. I think some industries do exercising better than others, but red team and exercise on at least an annual basis is worth its weight in gold.
So I want to piggyback on that discussion then, because, a lot of what you mentioned, with network monitoring and redundancy and training employees and all of that, that requires an investment within the organization. How do technologists or the information security team or whoever within the organization, how do we convince the C-suite that we need to invest money in more than just slapping new technologies onto the organization? How do we get them to buy in to investing in security?
When I was briefing a sheriff in a large county out on the West Coast with CISA, former NPPD, we were talking to the sheriff about, cybersecurity. He said, you know what? I have the best CISO in my county. Every Friday, he sends me a list of all the things that they thwarted, all the attacks that we did not get through because he did such a good job at having this stuff in place. And then one Friday, when the CISO was on vacation, the sheriff called, where's my list? I want to see what you did this week, because the security team, if they're doing a good job, they're like a no-hitter. Nothing happens, right? And they're silent and they're behind a screen somewhere. You got to let people know, look, here's what I've done. Here's the ROI. And you've got to advocate for yourself. And that's what I like to do with CISOs, is teach them to advocate to the CEO, to the elected official, to the person who has the budget and the policy. They need to make sure that people understand what they do and what the ROI is on certain things that they put in place. So sometimes you're going to have to say, look, this is how many attacks I have stopped from coming into our organization this week alone. And then someone will say, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is worth it.
That's great.
Yeah, go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, one of the things that I see as effective is that you got to speak in the language of the business. So many times as technologists and IT security professionals, we speak in terms of attacks and firewalls and intrusion detection and monitoring and logging. We need to talk in terms of obviously dollars and cents. But what happens when we have ransomware that impacts our crown jewels, whatever the crown jewels are? You can't access it anymore. Our patented technology leaks to a hostile near-peer nation state. What to do now? Okay, we have a certain portion of our workforce that can't come to work anymore, except it's absolutely important for them to have physical presence in certain locations. Now you have some real tangible examples that you can walk through with, with leadership, and then that's when you nestle in those little cybersecurity nuggets and all those best practices that we're very aware of. But you got to speak to them at the level that they're used to from a business operational perspective.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, I go back to kind of what I said at the beginning. I think for us, it's important to get the management team, the business, to think that, hey, this isn't a technology problem. It's not something you can just send away to the IT team or the CISO. It's a risk management issue. Similarly, piggybacking Tobias, you have to get the technical team to actually think dollars and cents, like this is a risk and how do we manage it? Implicit in the word resiliency is that something bad will happen and can happen. And of course, the breach isn't the point of failure. It's how you respond after the breach. I think the other key to resiliency is I see a lot of businesses focusing on the wrong part of what I call the funnel. And so, we divide the world into two types. There's targets of choice and there's targets of opportunity. Target of choice, someone in North Korea puts on a military uniform and you're their path to promotion. The vast majority of businesses in the United States are not targets of choice. The reasons they are being hacked are because it's opportunistic. They've made some sort of technological decision that's visible on the internet. That's the nail that's sticking out. And the bad guy's looking for the nail because they have the hammer, the vulnerability. And so, they focus so much on like the bottom of the funnel, like, antivirus and backups. They really need to focus on the top of the funnel, which is what are the things you're doing that make you a target in the first place? Because I can tell you every single one of our customers can be hacked, given enough time and effort. And I don't think that I'm breaking any classification, so don't tell me, Brian, but like my unit in the US government had a 100% success rate of penetrating foreign government networks. It's just impossible if someone has enough time and resources to keep them out. And so if we can focus on just eliminating the targeting component, you can dramatically reduce the likelihood of an attack. And it's very inexpensive to do that, right? So that's kind of been one of the learnings that we've had insuring businesses of all sizes across the country.
We had a question come in that it kind of piggybacks on what you just talked about, right? With nation states attacking others. And it's, we're in the middle of an election cycle here, right? And, what are some of the, and maybe I'll shoot it over to Brian first. What are some of the concerns we have with the election as far as cybersecurity goes, and what's being done to kind of secure this infrastructure?
Yeah, timely question. Obviously, CISA is very focused on this right now. I'm proud to say, having just come from that organization, we are better prepared today in dealing with real-time threats and vulnerabilities to the election infrastructure, more so than we ever have. We know that Russians were involved in our influencing our election in 2016. They came back in 18, and certainly they are back in 2020. I am confident in saying that nobody is switching one vote from A over to B. Really, their focus is on disinformation. And I think it really spoke to what I mentioned earlier, and that is about destabilizing America. This is what they're really about. If they can pit one American versus another American, and they can use some news story, they can amplify something, they can get everyone's blood starting to boil and hate on each other, that is success in their book. And so that is what they're trying to do. They're trying to magnify these offshoot stories in some corner newspaper somewhere in the United States and make it mainstream, just frankly, to piss everyone off. And so they've had a lot of success, and they're able to amplify their message through social media. And so really it's about being a patient voter, being a well-informed voter, and at the end of the day, not propagating and not spreading additional lies. Do your due diligence, do your fact checking before you start contributing to the echo chamber.
That's great. Anyone else have any additions to that piece?
Well, just watch the retweeting and the reposting. I think it's important to. I saw a feature the other day. I forgot which one I was on. It said, "Did you actually read this article before you retweet?" I think it was Twitter. They're saying, "Did you actually read it before you retweeted it?" And it was from a friend of mine, so I knew what it was. But I think that's what we have to figure out. Especially because people only follow on social media people that they agree with. They start blocking people they don't want to talk to, and so people can infiltrate those systems. And you just shouldn't be sharing things unless you know what you're sharing. And I think very few people, I can look at some of my tweets, how many people actually click on it before they retweet it. And so just be an informed consumer. And I found that with a lot of the state and local agencies that we work with, they have been really focused. And so it's hard for me when I hear people say, well, the government's not doing anything to secure the elections. The government is working from top to bottom. CISA's team is on it, the MSISAC, the state and local governments we work with. Everybody is laser focused, and there's so much good work being done, the election ISAC. So I feel really confident in the work that's being done, and I'm so thankful for all these heroes who are working every day.
That's great. Thank you both. So Josh, we had a question about cryptocurrency. And, because again, this is forward looking, and as more people adopt cryptocurrency and use it, what are some of the security concerns around that for both consumers and businesses?
Yeah, I mean, cryptocurrency, it's just software. So that's the easiest way to distill it. It's just software that performs a different type of function. And like all other types of software, it was written by human beings who are fallible. And so, sadly, it's only as secure as the software that's being written and the people that are writing it. So you certainly have seen some high profile, I think there's a DeFi crypto project that just had all of the money stolen from it because of a software vulnerability. It was like 46 million that was taken. So I think, crypto holds great promise if done the right way, but like all other forms of software, like it will have to go through an iterative process to build resiliency into the system. And again, I think if you think about it like a risk, like any others, businesses again have to think about that risk transfer portion. And sadly, this is an area where the insurance community is well behind. To my knowledge, you can't buy an insurance policy denominated in Bitcoin. So you might be able to buy a policy that covers crypto, and we do that. But the policy's in US dollars, your limit's in US dollars, but the crypto's in another one. So you have an FX issue. In some cases, it may not cover all the exposures of a crypto-related loss. So all I can say is there's a whole lot of work to be done in this space that has not yet been done. But I distill it as it's just software like everything else.
That's a great point. So, as we continue to deploy more technologies across our enterprises, as more and more employees telework, right? Many of us are making that permanent for our employees. As criminals evolve some of their tactics, but understanding also that they're remaining a lot of their tactics as before, it's easy to get overwhelmed, right? Thinking about the threat surface. We just kind of shut down. It's like it's too hard, too unruly to manage, so we're not going to do anything, or we'll do the bare minimum. As we look forward, what should be some of our priorities as organizations, particularly if they're making some of the first steps into kind of creating a more mature security culture within their organization? And I'll open that up to all of you.
I'll go quickly. I mean, I think, as many people have said, you have to reduce the cost. And it's the cost both in terms of monetary terms. Cybersecurity can actually be quite expensive, but even more than that, it's just the cost to understand the problem or understand what even to fix. And so one of the very simple things we've started doing is if our customers turn on a remote access to their network, they open up Microsoft RDP on the internet, we send them an alert that tells them, hey, this is a critical issue. It goes to their insurance broker and it goes to all the policyholder contacts and says, you are 7 times more likely to file a claim and experience a ransomware event if you don't address this. We do that for free. And it's not, again, because we're Mother Teresa. It's because if they file a claim, we're paying up to $20 million limit on that policy. And so, I think the biggest things we can do as a country, as an industry, are finding better ways to align incentives with customers, which unfortunately the tech industry hasn't done a great job of doing. There's the famous adage that there's only 2 industries without any products liability: software and religion. But at least with religion, you can take it up with the higher power. With software, you're just stuck with a 100-page long EULA. And if Microsoft was and I used to work there, so I'll pick on them. If they were responsible for all the flaws of their software, I'm sure they would have been bankrupted thousands of times over. So I think aligning incentives and then driving down the cost. Like, how do we just make it less expensive? And I think, the government, Kristin's organization, it sounds like, are doing a number of things to do that.
Yeah, and I'll say that really hearing Josh is like music to my ears, because it really is about the insurance industry. Why are we safer in our cars now? Because we get discounts if we have airbags and seat belts and don't get into accidents. And I think the insurance industry can really have a huge effect on the security of enterprise and even small business by saying, look, if you have these 3 things in place, we'll lower your premium. If you don't have a breach or you listen to our advice over the next 2 years, you'll get a bonus back. It works for car insurance. And I think it can work with cyber insurance too, now that we're getting more mature into the market. When I started working on cyber insurance issues 8-9 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. But today, I think that's a really great place for us to see some kind of movement. We've got to make sure that people are putting security in place. And unless you incentivize them, we can see by the numbers of people who opt into 2-factor. We've got to incentivize them or catch them when they've been hurt, or they're not going to act. We're not changing the security posture of the people we need to.
Yeah, my thought along those lines, and it's kind of along with some of the other thematic things I've said, is that I think we need to take a step back, maybe simplify. I think a lot of companies are leveraging technologies today. They may not actually getting their huge ROI in terms of return on their investment. A good example would be, just all the different chat technologies we're using internally as we communicate with each one of our fellow colleagues. If you Slack somebody, where's that data going? If you're using this app, where's that data going? Are you talking about things that are sensitive in nature about your business's, keys to the kingdom, and that's getting transferred out there? Why are we using these technologies? Can we take a step back and say, hey, what's ultimately critical? That's what Brian talked about. Don't treat pencils and diamonds or something along those lines. That's important, right? Also understand, yes, the dynamic has changed. When you're using technologies, where are these technologies coming from? Another note from Brian, I think he said 50 Chinese nation states and 70 Russian nation state agencies are potentially targeting us. What about the technologies that are being developed there, that are being manufactured there. Do we know that? Are we asking these hard questions to the folks that we're supplying these technologies to? So I think it's a bigger question that, in society, how much are we using as it relates to technology? Is that actually moving the needle in the right direction? I think that same question can be answered for each organization, for each department. Are we maximizing our use of technology, or are we just, increasing the risk because we have a new bell and whistle that we're trying to test out? So that would be my thought on those ones.
Yeah, Daniel, I think where do you start? I guess it's one bite at a time, to use the elephant analogy, right? But I think at times, we do walk up to the too hard to solve locker, open up that locker, kind of admire the problem real quick, and we close the locker again. And we say, okay, well, we'll fix it some other time. But I think one of the major pieces that we got to start with is understanding the capability of your own tools. We spend millions of dollars every single year on these whiz-bang tools that I'm sure are awesome to somebody. And we probably understand about 10 or 20% on how to actually use the tool.
Right.
So if you're going to make these huge investments, understand how to actually use the tool to drive down risk and mitigate threats. And then, I think we're just not doing the basic blocking and tackling right now. I think a lot of it just comes with the cyber hygiene that's out there. I think a big part of Curricula and what it is that they're trying to do through training and awareness is a major awareness piece that we all need to really embrace. We're having a technical conversation here, but at the end of the day, this is a people problem. And, they need to be aware of, kind of the rules of the road and that basic cyber hygiene, not to click on that email from that Nigerian prince, because I guarantee you there's no lottery money there for you. So, having understanding, having that educational piece is going to be important.
That's so great. And tying it back to that human element, right? Because a lot of social engineering attacks, right? They're not leveraging technical attacks necessarily as much as psychological attacks, right? Trying to trick people and influence them, play upon their emotion to click on links. And so I think that's really important. That has been reiterated multiple times throughout this session, is that it's not just a technology issue. We also have to address the physical concerns and the human element of this problem. That's what makes it so difficult and complex to confront. And so we had a question come in that, as we mentioned the business model of cybercrime with ransomware leading the charge, or the business model of cybercrime with ransomware leading the charge. What's the next future cybercrime business model that we should be afraid of?
Oh gosh, if anyone knows that, please tell me in advance.
You can put on your Miss Cleo hat.
Yeah, I think ransomware will continue to evolve for quite some time, and it's gone from holding the data ransom to now holding the privacy of the data ransom, which has just been fascinating. So now they're not just encrypting your data, they're exfiltrating it, keeping a copy of it, and encrypting it. And so now they have two sources of leverage. You've got to pay us to get access to the data back, and even if you think you can rebuild it or you have backups, how much are you willing to pay to keep it private? Because if you don't pay us, we're now going to release it on the internet. It's really, really, really bad. And I think that criminals are just going to look for more ways in which to extort people, because it's by far the highest profit margin criminal activity. It's also why we've actually seen at the same time ransomware has been increasing, data breaches have been decreasing. The number of claims we're paying out on credit cards being stolen or PII or whatnot has actually gone down. The criminals are entirely moving to this new economic model because they can make more money. So I think at the end of the day, any future model will be one that generates even more profit more easily for criminals, and that allows them to continue to act with impunity and without fear of being held responsible.
And similar to that, we're seeing romance scams are flourishing right now because it's profitable. And I had this epiphany, this light bulb came off about 2 weeks ago. I said, wait a minute, cybercrime can't go away until it's not profitable. It is just so profitable. It's not going to go away until we make it so that they don't make so much money. And then also from the law enforcement standpoint and the prosecution standpoint, I'm doing a lot of work with the World Economic Forum and Third Way and the Cyber Peace Institute, looking at how are we trying to actually catch the bad guys? And do we even have the same language for the laws on an international basis? And we don't. We're not going to, be able to put these people behind bars and stop them. So until it's not so lucrative, it's not going away. So we have to actually follow the money. Where are they making the money? Yeah, the data breaches are gone because all of our stuff was exposed already on Equifax anyway. I mean, every American social security number between OMB and Equifax, it's all out there. So now what are they doing? Okay, well, romance scams, there's a lot of people passing away. So they follow the obituaries, and then go to on Facebook and friend these widows and widowers. I had someone try and do that to my mother-in-law when my father-in-law passed away in April, and they tried to get her on a grandparent scam. They follow the obituaries. And with so many people hurting right now, they're just going to go where the easy money is. So we have to be thinking about what are the easy money criminal activities. And that's what I think is going to keep going. They're not going to do the more difficult stuff because we're letting them make a lot of money on simple things.
Yeah. One thought I had, and I don't know, I'm kind of thinking about this off the top of my head, but I think there's a challenge now between our private business persona, our private personal life persona, and our social media persona. As more and more of this information is intertwined, we're going to be more and more leveraged by those nefarious actors to use that information to do dastardly things, potentially, right? So the concern is that, we talked about the romance spoofing. There'll be other types of ransomware. Maybe it's not targeting small businesses or medium businesses or large businesses, but they're targeting individuals, and they're going to be targeting individuals to get leverage to have those individuals potentially carry out other things that they wouldn't necessarily be being able to do otherwise. So look out for that. Our background checking processes probably need to be spruced up a little bit. We need to have more policies in how we handle public, private, social media environments. That's just something that our rules and laws haven't really caught up yet with, frankly. But I think that's probably the next avenue that you're going to see is compromised individuals, whatever way they've been compromised, and we'll get into those details, but compromised individuals then performing actions that are potentially inappropriate and hurtful to businesses.
Yeah, being extorted. I don't know if anyone followed this, but I believe it was in Norway, psychiatric provider was hacked, and they were literally holding hostage. They were going to release, they actually were not trying to get the ransom just out of the company. They were going to each patient and telling them that if they didn't pay $400, they were going to release their health records. And this included minors. I see a lot of horrible things, but that really was just a gut check for me. And I think, Tobias, that goes to your point of there's lots of ways in which criminals can extort individuals. And I think we've just seen the tip of the surface on that.
I could list organization after organization after organization as far as breaches go, right? We recently had an incident with Twitter. Of course, we had Equifax, Capital One. I could go on. What is it going to take for organizations to really lock down and build a culture of security within their organizations, or lock down their systems to a point where we're reducing these breaches and these vulnerabilities? Because it just seems like every day in the news there's another thing happening, and we saw the first death potentially related to a ransomware or a cyber incident in right. Germany. So it's reached that human death point potentially as they figure that out. So what is it going to take? Where do we go from here?
I think it has to get 1 degree away.
Question to you, Joshua, just real
sure.
Quick. So let's hear me out on this. So you have insurance, right? Cyber insurance, folks.
Right.
And now the cybersecurity threat or potential impact from a cybersecurity risk is now quantifiable. It's on the balance sheet. It now becomes errors and omissions, disaster recovery, and then we have this other line item here called cyber. And now I can write it off potentially as a cost that I can balance in my overall financials. How has insurance maybe softened or maybe reduced the potential threat and concerns of cyber risk? That's really a generic question I have for you. But what were your thoughts along those lines? Sorry, Daniel.
That's a great. No, I'm not the only one that can ask questions. Go on.
Yeah, sure. So you can never no insurance company will let you transfer 100% of your risk, right? You always have a deductible or what they call a retention. So you have skin in the game with us. And then, of course, there is a certain standards that you have to meet in order for us to insure you. If you have actively exploited vulnerabilities in the internet, you have RDP access points open, and you apply for insurance with us, we decline you. And so at the end of the day, we're allowing companies to pool their risk together, because of course the cost of a cyber incident for any one company can be devastating. But if we can spread the cost across all of them and they're all chipping in just a little bit, then we can protect all of them. Now, of course, it's our job to make sure that, and I'm sorry for my expression, but that no one's peeing in our pool. We want our risk pool to be as pristine and as clean as possible. And in that respects, we're acting as a regulator, a private regulator that's ensuring that all of the businesses we insure are adhering to some minimum level of hygiene, and otherwise, performing this critical function of allowing people to pool risk. And so, we found that works. We do have an ability to actually quantify it. We're trying to do a better job of getting that data into companies' hands, because so many people make these investments blindly without knowing what they're doing. And I try and tell business owners, like, if you just implement MFA, like that one control, that is by far the highest ROI thing you can do. And that is substantiated by 3 years of insurance claims data that we have. There's a number of other things, and I could go on and on. But just some of the basic things would be remarkably helpful. Does that answer the question, Tobias?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I mean, the thing I was getting at is that maybe some decision makers become desensitized to the cyber threat to a degree. That they see it, they can quantify it. It may or may not impact them. They have resumption, they have continuity planning, and then they can move on. They can survive the event. And maybe we've become, as a society, and some of the decision makers have got to the point where they're like, hey, I can live to see another day because I have insurance. I have these other means.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I should point out is, like, against my own interest, like, insurance is not the end all be all, right? Like, it's not like, an insurance can't cover everything. I mean, we may help our customers survive, but at the end of the day, they suffer a lot of pain. And there's one thing that we have in common with our customers. Neither of us want them to file a claim, right? Like, that's not a fun experience for either of us. And that's where that economic alignment comes in, where it's like, how do we work with our customers to prevent these things from happening? And so take last year, 6.4% of cyber insurance policyholders in the US market filed a claim that was in excess of their deductible, right? The insurance company paid something out. For our customers in the same period, it was 1.4%, which I'm very happy about, because the lower the frequency of claims of our customers, of course, the better is our loss ratio. Our customers are happy too, because they don't have as many cyber incidents. And so that's where it's like, I think there's this virtuous circle that really these different industries can play a role in tackling this as a risk management problem, as I've mentioned. And that involves bringing the cybersecurity world together with the insurance world. And again, to be honest, there's a lot of insurance companies that haven't done that terribly well. And that's sort of the challenge that we all have to collectively solve. We're trying to do that in our own small way.
Yeah, Tobias, just to quickly bring it back to kind of the personal element here, I guarantee you that there's somebody on this phone call right now that is saying to themselves, well, we do background checks. We do a background check every 7 years, or we did it once when that person first arrived. Assuming that person doesn't have a want or a warrant out for their arrest, they're going to sail through that background check. Has nothing to do. They don't look into anything on the cyber side of the world. You could be a notorious hacker who's never been arrested and sail right through most background checks. So that is not the litmus test that we should be using. But we should include a number of tools to monitor our system in real life. Cyber insurance, I think, is incredibly important as a tool in the toolbox. But my goodness, if you're the CSO, I think you need to know what is happening in real time in your system. And if you don't have that, you're kind of flying blind.
So we have about 1.5 minutes left of this panel. And so I like to end on a positive note, an empowering note with these sessions. And so I would love for you to give these organizations, these awareness practitioners, whoever's on the call today, 1 to 2 steps or tips that they can take and put into action today when they leave this webinar. And I've heard 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. That's a great one that people should probably leave here today with and implement. But what can they do when they leave this session? What steps should they take?
Well, I'll
Aside from
start off.
two-factor. Oh, go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, no, I was just going to start off and say what I started with, just a couple quick points. Know thy third party. Who you're doing business with is incredibly important today. It's a changing landscape. You're not going to always know who that is, but you need to study it. You need to know who it is. And then know thy product. Not every piece of technology, blinky light software that you're purchasing behave the same. You need to open up the hood, understand the inner workings, and make risk-based decisions from there. Those are my 2 points.
That's great. And the other speakers, quickly.
Yes, aside from doing two-factor, pick someone like a fire drill captain in your organization by department, someone who's in charge of cyber education and bringing great groups like Curricula in and keeping it going and keeping it fresh all year round, not just once a month.
Right.
Back up your data and keep it in an offline network. I mean, again, breach is not the point of failure. If something bad happens and you can restore, makes life so much easier. And you'd be surprised how many even large organizations, they think they're backing up, but then when it comes time to do it, something doesn't work. So that's a big one.
Great. Brian, last few seconds.
Tomorrow morning, drop a sticky note on your analyst's desk and say, we have just seen an attack. We've seen some malicious malware. We've seen something in our system. What are you going to do about it? Go. And just check and test your own response and recovery systems. Who are we alerting? Are we alerting law enforcement, our own management, our regulators? Who needs to come to the table to make some of these collective decisions to come back to normalcy? You would be surprised what people don't know, or they just kind of freak, or that document that's been on that counter collecting dust for the last 7 years is outdated. There's probably an opportunity for you to update some of the basic things that you're going to utilize in your time of need.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you. Brian, Kristin, Joshua, and Tobias, it's been a pleasure getting the opportunity to speak with you all during this hour. And I hope you all enjoyed the rest of the Curriculaville event today. And with that, our session is over.